Hey, everybody, it's Devin and James here. We're here before we enter the Den of Sin to say a little bit about the Anchor app and Anchor FM, where we record our podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place.
Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
And if you're like James and myself living so far apart, we record ours and we're able to upload onto Anchor FM with no problems at all. And by hosting on Anchor, they distribute our podcast to all of the listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. It's a huge list.
It's everything you need to make a podcast in literally one place.
And you know what the best part of all is, James?
Is it because the Anchor is totally free?
It's because Anchor's totally free.
That's always the best part. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
All right, and on to the den.
Welcome back to another episode of Den of Sin with Devin and James. I am the James portion of Devin and James, wishing you a happy October, my favorite season of the year. I think probably if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a fan of October. That's just an assumption. You might not. You might hate October. That's fine too. To each their own. With me tonight, as always, is my illustrious co-host, really the host. I'm kind of the Robin to his Batman. And with me, as always, is Devin. How you doing, Devin?
I'm all right. I'm definitely co-host. It's not a sidekick situation. We're two Batmans here. I don't know which of us is Adam West and which one of us is Christian Bale, but
I would not be the person to answer that. I feel more like poor George Clooney.
Yeah, those are the only times those words have ever been used.
Right, exactly.
Or George Clooney.
Or George Clooney. Exactly.
Well, happy October, everybody. And I'm a little less tolerant than my buddy James. If you do not like October, I don't think you should even be listening to this podcast. You might not like the weather, but if you don't like what October represents,
there you go.
It's Halloweenness. Then well, you're more than welcome to listen. I just don't see what you could possibly enjoy.
I mean, look, maybe not everybody, maybe it's not everybody's favorite. Maybe people like Christmas. Maybe people like the summer. To each their own, I guess. I don't want to start off this podcast with such negativity, but definitely October is my favorite. And so that's all I'll leave it there. But are you having a good Halloween season so far? I call it Halloween season instead of October, because that's really what I care about. But are you having a good October so far, Devin?
Yeah, not too bad. Just kind of same old so far. We're a little over a week into it, and we've got the Halloween decorations up and all that kind of good stuff. And it's beginning to look a lot like Halloween, I suppose. And certainly the movies we're discussing tonight they're kind of perennial Halloween classics, I think, on all sorts of TV, like ranging. I've seen some of these on PBS. I've seen some of them on Cinemax, but
2 of the 3 are on the Criterion channel. So I think that speaks volumes. 1 of the 3 is not, and for very good reason, which we will discuss. But yeah, I mean, I was going to try. I thought all afternoon, I'm like, what kind of pun could I use to sort of introduce this movie? Because it seems like it would be just rife for punnage.
You're right.
I just couldn't think of any. Nothing that wasn't growing your territory, like really embarrassingly bad, like dad joke territory. But so instead of introducing it in a clever, fun way, I will just introduce it. Tonight we are going to discuss the trilogy, if you want to call it that, the 3 movies in the Blob film franchise, if you want to call it that. We're going to talk about the Blob movies. That's what we're talking about.
The very lucrative Blob franchise. I mean, I guess it did give us one of the biggest movie stars of the 20th century. So
yep, yes, Kevin Dillon. Oh, I mean, I thought you were thinking about Steve McQueen, I think. Oh, I have a lot to say about Kevin Dillon, but we will get there. Um, this was an interesting. I remember I posted as maybe we could do. I feel like it's always fun to talk about remakes because of how much flack people give remakes, and as you know, even this week, a remake just came out of a very popular film in the horror genre, that being Hellraiser. The Hulu exclusive Hellraiser just came out, but the horror remakes are coming out nonstop these days, and a lot of people have a knee jerk reaction to just the sheer idea of a horror remake and that it's inherently terrible and all remakes suck. And while I understand the sentiment because there's a lot of ammunition to that argument, I feel like it is a very kind of, it's a blanket statement that doesn't, once you actually think about it, it doesn't really hold up. And I feel like it's an unfair thing. And tonight we're talking about a movie that I originally had, it's a movie I always say, oh, if you think all remakes suck, what about the Blob 1988 remake of the 1958 sci-fi classic? And then that's when you reminded me that there was actually in between those two, there was actually a official sequel to the original 58 version, which we will talk about. But yeah, that's where the impetus came from. That's where the idea came from. Because again, I do think it's an interesting juxtaposition of the 58 version against the 88 version, and how those two movies, how much, story-wise, there's just a lot of similarities, but then that's really where the similarities end. But yeah, Devin, first off, why don't you discuss your own personal viewing history with the Blob, and when did you first see the original Blob? When did you come into knowing about the Blob? Tell me your personal history with the Blob films.
I can't remember like the first channel I saw it on. It was definitely on TV, but it was probably like KDOC 56 or
Yeah,
PBS or something like that. My guess is it probably was around Halloween time, and I was young enough that I had no idea who the lead actor was. I kind of had a general idea of who the lead actress was, oddly enough. We'll get into that in a second too. But my first experience with the original Blob was definitely as a kid, and loved it, and always thought it kind of stood out and was special from kind of the schlocky B movie run of the 50s, because the 50s were particularly schlocky, especially for horror. It really, in a lot of ways, it belonged to science fiction. The 50s did, but there's sci-fi elements to this too. With the remake, I saw it like on Cinemax right around the time that it came out. But that memory is like long ago buried. I would say the first time I really consciously watched it was somewhere in my 20s, and then rewatched it during the pandemic. And I'm always kind of happily surprised to watch the remake of The Blob. And as for the sequel that we'll get to probably somewhere in the middle here, I've wanted to see it for a really long time. And when you mentioned doing The Blob, I chomped at the bit. I was like, I've been wanting to see this kind of a middle ground sequel for like the longest time. So this gave me finally the excuse I needed to buckle down and watch that. So that one's brand new to me.
But yeah, it's funny because I think as I was thrown by the fact that the sequel did go by two names. I think I used to see it called Beware of the Blob, and because that was the theme song, I always just thought when I saw it, it was like, I don't know. I didn't realize that the Beware the Blob and Son of the Blob, which I think is where I was more aware of, was the same film. But it was definitely a thing where it was never played on. I mean, you never saw it on TV. I never saw it on TV, and then it wasn't held. It wasn't like a film that people were, it wasn't held in the highest of regard or something that a film people talked about. So
it was definitely essentially, I would say it was essentially well and properly buried until the DVD era, when suddenly there was a reignited interest in just anything that people hadn't seen in a long while.
Yeah, exactly. And it's we'll talk about it. It's an interesting film. But yeah, I feel like I say this sentence a lot on this podcast, which is, I think, kind of, it explains a lot. But my mom was a big fan of the Blob. She thought it was really funny, and she had very specific memories of seeing it. And so it was a movie that, like, I remember thinking was silly, but also kind of being really honestly scared of the concept of this big gelatinous blob. So on one hand, I thought it was this silly old movie. On the one hand, it was actually one of the rare cases where it was a monster I was actually legitimately scared of. And we'll definitely talk about the horror potential of the concept of the Blob. But I was very familiar with the '88 remake, and I have a lot to discuss when we get there. But the '88 remake was something that I was very familiar with, and I saw it straight, when it came to rental, and I was a fan then, and I remember being honestly pretty traumatized by some of the effects and some of the sequences, and as far as like it really pushed the boundary of practical effects, but also like disturbing on-screen deaths. And it has a very strange vibe to it, which I think I love and I think works really well, especially in today's context. But again, we'll discuss that more when we go in depth. But yeah, there are films I rewatched the '58 Blob for the first time in over a decade, maybe even longer. When I saw it was actually streaming on their Criterion, I think 6 or 7 months ago. And again, I was surprised by, it's for a dumb movie. And I say that with, it was a 1950s low budget produced by a company that made Christian movies. It didn't have a lot. It was notorious as being a quote unquote bad movie for a long time, but it's actually, there's a lot of hokiness to it. And a lot of it obviously just feels super dated, but it's actually, the characters are pretty competent. They don't make a lot of dumb decisions that teenagers or young people make. It's hard. They're supposed to be teenagers, but goddamn, they're not teenagers. It's so obvious that these are not teenagers. Steve McQueen's never always had the face of a 50-year-old, but it was, it's surprising still a really good, fun movie. I've read reviews in years. It's like it plods, and it's like, and I was like, I felt like the pace was really good. I think that the dynamics. Anyways, I don't want to go jump right into it, but either way, I wasn't able to rewatch it for this podcast, but I had just seen it a few months ago, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. And again, I'd seen it before, and it's a pretty note. If you like B films and '50s drive-in movies and science fiction films and horror films, about the Blob. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about it, as I sort of already did. I'll let you though go with your thoughts on the 1958 Blob.
All right. Well, I think we're already kind of starting to show that we each have a preference for one or the other, and I don't think it's going to shock the audience to find out which one we each individually prefer. But I don't think that means that we disliked either of them. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, the original Blob, made in 1958, or released in 1958 anyways, was directed by a guy named Irvin Shorty Yeaworth, or Yaworth. You just got to love anybody named Shorty. I'm on board. Shorty Yeaworth, who Junior, I don't want to upset Shorty Senior. But he is not best known as also being the director of the films 4D Man, and this is one of my favorite titles ever, Dinosaurus. Because you got to further classify the dinosaurs. You got to know what kind of dinosaur. It was a dinosaur. What kind? A dinosaurus.
Dude, we should do a whole episode of just stupid 1950s horror movie titles, which I'm sure you already know, and you probably bring up. But the Blob had some interesting original titles before it was called the Blob.
Sure did.
Which you are, I'm sure you were already aware of.
Well, yeah, it was the something meteor. The
molten meteor.
The molten meteor was the title on the original script. And then they had this small independent group of basically Christian filmmakers.
Yeah.
Who were trying to do a little Ed Wood action here and get some Hollywood money to produce other kinds of films, and substantially more successful than Ed Wood. Let's at least put that out there now. But yeah, they sat around and apparently for days were trying to come up with what to call this thing. And it's never called anything in the script, or in the movie. In the script, it's called The Mass,
which was another name. So yeah, it was originally, one title was The Mass, another was The Glob, which is like so close yet so far. So they really did go with the best title.
Well, what separated them from the Glob was they found out the Glob was actually the name of a cartoon and some animator. I can't remember which one it was. It wasn't like Fritz Freeling or Chuck Jones or any of those guys. But yeah, apparently the Glob was already taken. And so they went with the Blob. But Jack H. Harris, who's kind of the hero of all three of these, he's the only named credit on all three, and he was involved in all three. He was the producer, and he was actually involved in a few low budget independent movies, including Dark Star for John Carpenter.
Yeah.
So I don't believe he was part of the Christian organization. I think the director and some of the talent came from that. The writers came from that pool. But Jack H. Harris was like his own sort of like indie mogul, or at least fancied himself his own indie mogul. And he actually had a brilliant idea, and it worked out perfectly. I've never heard of this before. But the reason why he wanted a title like The Blob was because he knew that something simple and silly like that would get like stuck in the heads of the TV comedians at the time, and that he would have like Steve Allen and Bob Hope making Blob jokes before you knew it. And sure enough, he was right. There were even jokes about the Blob made at the Oscars that year. And he got all this free advertisement out of making a funny name for the comedians to kind of latch onto, and they were none the wiser. They're just gravitating
That's
towards
genius.
Blob. Yeah, that's as insightful as any like legitimate mogul could come up with, I think.
That's incredible. That's very astute. I did not know that.
I thought it was downright brilliant. But,
yeah, absolutely. And like I said, and dead on accurate. So,
and then he also had a hand in the theme song, which became a best-selling record as well, which is certainly not going to hurt the marketing of the film.
No.
But the name of the song, as you mentioned before, is "Beware of the Blob," and it's by a band called the Five Blobs, who,
yeah.
who is actually
really?
It's one dude being recorded 5 times. I have his name here somewhere. Let me see.
Isn't it Burt Bacharach?
No, the singer is Bernie Nee, Kne.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you're right. Burt Bacharach co-wrote the song.
Gotcha.
So, and it was his first. It's not even a film credit because he gets no credit on it, but it is the first thing he ever wrote for film. And obviously, Burt Bacharach is major in both pop music and film scores.
Yeah.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid coming immediately to mind. One of the biggest top-selling soundtracks of all time that I personally have owned on CD and vinyl and cassette. But yeah, that little pop ditty, "Beware of the Blob."
It peeps inside the room. Anyways, I feel like it's still, though. I mean, the Blob song, "Beware the Blob," is probably more iconic than more people know of the song that have probably actually seen the movie.
Yeah,
it's on every single Halloween playlist, and they play it like
it's still Dr. Demento a million times.
Yeah, so become its own thing. But it also doesn't. The film is played straight. The film itself is played, for scares and to be exciting. But the theme song is so silly, and purposely so. It's like it's a jaunty, silly. It knows exactly what it is, but just in hindsight, it's so weird that they went with such a silly, goofy song for a movie that they were, I think, trying to have audiences take seriously. Like the trailer is played for scares. So yeah, just a weird, interesting fact.
I think the movie was more self-aware than most B movies, and I think it did have. It certainly has some intentional laughs. It has probably as many intentional laughs as unintentional laughs. But yeah, it is more of a straightforward sort of horror sci-fi entry for the time. But yeah, good old Shorty didn't know about the song.
Oh yeah.
Well, they had recorded music for the Blob, and you can hear it throughout the rest of the movie. It's scored, but it's scored by Shorty's wife, whose name I don't have here, Mrs. Shorty.
Mrs. Shorty.
And that's probably so degrading. I don't mean it in that way, but yeah,
we all get it.
People get it. But anyways, yeah, she actually wrote the score, and there was actually even one of the tracks is the love song of the Blob. But you can find it on YouTube if anybody's curious. The opening is exactly the same. It was always supposed to have that weird spiral, sort of almost Saul Bass looking like Hitchcock thing, which is also a really effective way to make your low budget movie look impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
love Saul Bass, and I think, and like I said, there's a certain aesthetic. There's a lot of iconography from 50s film, like things like that. The spy, like they're just so I think they still work, they still hold up. It's still like a cool, yeah. I mean that I will say I think in the pantheon of the best film posters of all time, that's got to be in my top 10, top 5 maybe. But the Vertigo, the Saul Bass Vertigo Hitchcock, it's still one of the greatest film posters of all time.
Agreed.
Just so direct and yeah.
I grew up with that on my wall. I think actually, friend of the show Casey got it for me when he worked at Suncoast. So
good stuff. Yeah, it's. I mean, Saul Bass was a genius. Anyways,
but anyway, Saul Bass had nothing to do with this movie.
No, he did.
But Steve McQueen did, as we've mentioned. Steve McQueen in his feature debut, Shorty wasn't too sure about him at first, but Harris thought he had charisma, and Shorty did agree once they got him in. Believe it or not, the rest of the cast, like the rest of the boys in the cast, anyways, are teenagers. It's just one of those things where 50s teenagers look like
grown-ass men, yeah.
Grown-ass men, yes.
But specifically Steve McQueen.
Specifically Steve McQueen. He's
you
28 years old, and he looks like he's ready to collect his Social Security.
Which is so crazy to me that he was 28 in 58, because that meant by 78, he was 48. And I just didn't realize he was already that. I mean, I'm almost 48, but I'm a few years away from that. But I just didn't realize in the 70s when he was really getting famous, he was already like middle-aged, which I mean, now I think about it, I guess, but he just definitely had a younger man's energy. But yeah, well, 28 when he was supposed to be playing 17.
He always kept that energy going, you know.
Yeah.
That was part of him, which is why it was so weird when the cancer started to grab hold of him at a young age. And you can see it in his last movie. He's really slow, but he's playing it deliberately to be slowed down. That's part of his character. But yeah, in this, he's still pretty fresh-faced for Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
It's funny. You can see him holding cigarettes behind his back and things like these moments where you can see cigarette smoke coming up behind his back, but nobody in the movie smokes.
Yes.
But he was smart about it too. He completely understood how ridiculous it was that he was there and trying to play a teenager. And so what he worked out with Shorty was basically he said, look, I'm going to look insane if I try to play this like I'm 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this as I would play any other part, but my character is very sincere and innocent. And I think in that way, like, yeah, once you get past like that immediate first moment, which is only compounded by the fact that we know Steve McQueen's face anyways.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, once you get past that first moment, I think he does a fine job of it. And
no, I mean, he's not the Steve McQueen that he would come to be. He doesn't have the same on-screen presence and stuff, but he's still, I mean, he's great.
He hasn't discovered the turtlenecks yet and gotten super badass, you know?
Exactly. But I mean, I find the cast for a 50s drive-in sci-fi low-budget film, I think they're all serviceable. I think, I'm blanking on the actress's name, but the main female love interest, whatever you want to call her.
I know her first name is Annetta. I believe her last name is Curso.
Something. Yeah,
it's spelled kind of Frenchy, and
which I can empathize with. Poor lady, but yeah, she's great in it.
And she was the one that I knew the first time I saw this because I wasn't a McQueen fan, but I recognized her as Helen Crump, which was Andy Griffith's girlfriend on the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah. She's also in a movie called Bad Ronald, which someday we should talk about because I have things to say about the movie Bad Ronald. But anyways, my thing that struck me watching it was, unlike so many others, even to this day, teenagers are played to be kind of idiots. They make stupid decisions, and they're always making really illogical decisions of let's not tell anybody, we'll try to handle this ourselves, and just always making stupid decisions. Where in this, they're pretty competent. They really know they're trying to let people know. They're trying to get law enforcement involved right away. They're trying to organize the town. There's definitely a thing in this was at the height of when teenagers became its own subculture, and where Hollywood itself was recognized that teenagers for the first time in American history were had some sort of importance to society and culture. And they had the free time finally. Before they were shipped off to the mines before they even got to high school. This was just within the first generation or two of the first teenagers to even really go to high school in mass. Yeah, and have
and because
their parents had a little bit of money. There was the middle class, was the height of the actual middle class, and they were buy records, and they had their own identity. Where before they were just sort of seen as bothersome, not yet adults. But it's interesting because a lot of films at the time painted kids still as ne'er-do-wells and rebels, and
the fear of the other that came from the older generation filmmakers at the time.
So it's interesting that, and again, this was aimed obviously at teenagers, but even then, even to the 70s, 80s, up until even today, lots of films that are pointed at kids still make kids seem to be out to be kind of dipshits or do stupid things from the point of view, well, they're just kids. But this movie, weirdly, like, the kids are really, like, intelligent. They, like, they're pretty altruistic. Like, it's an interesting, at no point do you go, God damn these stupid kids. Like, no point in the script you're like, you're rooting for them and you hope they succeed. And Steve McQueen's really great because he has to basically go up against adults and authority figures, and at no point does, one, it seem unbelievable, or two, does he come across as like he seems like a good dude that he's just trying to, I don't know, it's very interesting. It's interesting that it had that. I didn't even think about that, probably growing up watching it, but in hindsight, with having seen more films and having more expectations of what these kind of films are and what they do script-wise, rewatching it a few months ago, I was like, wow, I like these teenage characters, especially in 50s movies where kids are really like stereotypical leader, like, real like wise asses, or like just like rebels, or they're goody two. Like this, I don't know. I enjoyed the characters. It's definitely it's not played as tongue in cheek as I think a lot of people. It's played pretty earnestly from their point of view, which I really appreciate. I appreciate that aspect of it. It's got notorious reputation for, again, being like, oh, look how stupid this movie is, how silly it is. Oh, it's a blob. Oh, they're being attacked by jelly. But the movie itself is actually really holds up. And if you do see the Criterion version, for whatever, or even streaming, it looks fantastic. All the color,
the fact that it was color at all, I mean,
yes,
that sets it apart from like the others, and even the big studio productions. And this was released by Paramount as a double bill. It was the B picture to I Married a Monster from Outer Space. Yeah, I believe that's what it was called.
Yes, you are.
Yes. It's a film that I've heard of, but I actually haven't seen. But it quickly became the A picture, and Paramount realized they had a hit on their hands. But it wasn't produced in-house by Paramount. And if it had been, I guarantee you it would have been in black and white.
Yeah.
These guys scrounged up enough money to do it in color because they knew it was going to add production value, just like their Saul Bass style opening did and all that kind of stuff. And also because they had a monster that was unlike any other monster, and they wanted the monster... Like, the blob has no power over an audience if it's a gray blob. The fact that it's clear and becomes red is everything. It will always look silly, to modern audiences. But to an audience in the 50s, to have seen it come out of the meteor in a very often imitated opening sequence, starring a guy named Ole. I just love a guy named Ole. It's a name you don't hear anymore. But the old man, very much, there's Jordy Verrill vibes from Creepshow, and I mean, aside from just the remake,
Killer Clowns from Outer Space, very similar.
That's going to come up later for sure.
Yeah,
but basically the color was very impressive. To kind of round back to what you were saying about the teenagers too, the kids are treated with respect within the script. Within the writing, I should say.
Yeah.
There's the cops are even treated with respect as well. Yeah. The problem is that nobody believes the kids. It's not that the kids are hiding anything. It's like they try to go the proper routes. Yeah. And they have the town doctor on their side. The problem is he gets 8 second or no third. So the person that would believe them got 8. But there's a sympathetic sheriff, and then even the punk ass cop who's trying to like give them shit the whole time. you actually get this weird sort of, I'm sure, unintentional character development on him when you find out that he was like in the war and saw some shit.
Yeah.
And then there's even an implication that the car accident that made him hate kids involved a bunch of drunk kids hitting his wife in their car. And they never say what happened to the wife, but they're giving him some reason for his
100%. Yep. There's actually some nuance. Exactly.
There's some nuance to it. And the kids are allowed to be mature kids. They're not necessarily allowed to be adults by the other adults, but the parents are like believe the kids when they're have the police calling and say, hey, your kid was potentially breaking into the doctor's office, and they're like, well, that doesn't sound like them. Let's wait until tomorrow to find out what really happened.
Yep.
And it's actually a really nice community. But also the character, the female lead played by Annette Corso, like she's actually really ballsy at times too.
Yep.
She's not a damsel in distress type, which is typical even now, let alone 1958.
58, yep.
And she's standing up for herself in the opening when she thinks Steve McQueen might have taken other people up to like make out point. And he has to prove to her, which I don't believe for a second because it's Steve McQueen. But if you're going just based on how he plays the character, I believe the character has never taken anyone up to make out point. But also at another point when they are dealing with the cop who's kind of persnickety with them, he says, this is just these kids trying to make idiots of us. And she straight up tells him, no, you're doing a good job of that by yourself. And that's a good applause line for that moment. I will say that as for the kids not being stupid, the larger group of kids that are introduced into the film are introduced by starting a drag race in reverse.
Yeah. But again, no,
they're still doing dumb kid things. They're allowed to be kids.
Yes. But towards the kids they take on responsibility just as much as the adults of let's solve this. Let's help this town. Let's get figure out how to stop this. And but again, though, it's still a 50s movie. There's still, again, there's still the punk kids and stuff. But at no point is it angsty or is it trying to make a point about you just don't understand us and it's really
it never gets James Deany about it.
No,
it's
just they're real kind of they're just normal kids up to no good. Just what kids teenagers got up to. But
it might be the first mention of all time on film, anyways, of a midnight movie too, and that's what the kids are up to that night. Is they're going to the midnight spook show, as they call it, which is kind of cool. But yeah, these punk kids, they're not going out to make mischief. They're going out to watch the movies. Where they go to see the marquee reads "Daughter of Horror," also Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out is this the daughter of also Bela Lugosi, or is Bela Lugosi also playing as a movie?
Yeah, exactly. Or is he showing up in person? Which by 58 could have been a thing,
right?
Poor Bella.
It's advertised the theater as healthfully air conditioned, and it's also giving birth to one of the most famous iconic shots of people running out of a movie theater.
I was going to say that the Blob coming out of the air vent and then everybody running are probably the two. If you say the Blob to most people, that even if they've never seen that, they'll think of those two things. I mean, I remember for years, any documentary, TV show, special, anything on the history of horror movies, that scene of them running out of the theater was always included. Always.
Yeah, even out of context, everybody loves a good scare. Cut to the shot of everybody running out of the theater. It even pops up in some ways on the Thriller video, Michael Jackson Thriller video has elements of that, and that theater still stands, by the way.
Oh, does it?
They have a 3-day Blob Fest there every summer.
Oh, I was going to bring up Blob Fest.
In Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where this movie was shot, or in and around Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. But that theater is still there, and the diner is gone. But the diner exists, but has been relocated to California, and another diner has gone up in its place in Phoenixville. So you can go and hang out and and check out some of the locations. And apparently, every year they do an annual like recreation of the running out of the theater shot.
Yeah, I have friends that go every year who
We
are
should
sort of.
go. We should do
I
that.
I want to go. I can't imagine a more fun weekend.
Well, every year that they have Blobfest, they pull out one of the big stars of the Blob, and obviously it's not Steve McQueen. We lost Steve McQueen in the early '80s. There's one particular character that has survived almost all of them. I think the main teenager, the one that McQueen is most competitive with until they
Yes.
become
Yeah.
allies, he's still kicking around.
Oh,
Uh,
good. Oh,
but
wow. Really?
yeah, he does a commentary on one of the Criterion discs, and although that was done in like 2001, but I did double check. He is still around. He's like 84 now. But that's not the celebrity that they wheel out to Blobfest, which is the Blob itself. Uh, this is brand new info to me since we started researching this podcast. I can't believe that this has escaped me. Uh, the real Blob, the ball of vegetable red food dyed colored silicone, still exists. It's still being transported around in a same black bucket that they used to carry it around on the set, and it is still pliable. So
Wow.
the Blob is alive and well and like ready for work, which is, I don't. There's a little part of me that gets giddy knowing that.
That's I'm glad it's preserved. That's the right word, right? That works. Preserved.
It
It's a
works.
preservative. It looks like jelly. Boom, boom, boom. I could not go there, but yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I was always as a kid, I was wondering what it was specifically, and I guess it's like it's a combination of was silicone in them, or was it the maybe I'm thinking of the '88 one, which it was like the thickening agent used for like milkshakes. It's like a
No,
combination.
that's the '88 one, and
Okay,
we'll
yeah,
talk about that one too. But yeah, the original Blob was very simple. It was,
just red
I
dyed
mean,
silicone.
it's got to be toxic on some level
Oh yeah,
to be lasting this long.
yeah.
But I would love to meet the Blob. I don't know if the Blob is giving out autographs, but I would like a selfie with the Blob. I think Blobfest might be a reasonable destination.
We could write it out. We could write off our taxes as a business expense.
Exactly. I think we have to start making money off of
I was
this
gonna
in order
say,
to write anything
literally
off.
do it.
But yeah, I thought that was a fun little tidbit, and I am like legitimately impressed by that. I mean, obviously it's a completely different thing, and it's even older than the Blob. But you look at like the animatronic or not the stop motion skeleton of King Kong. I think one of them is still around, and these things they deteriorate. So even when you find one in good condition, that good condition is very relative to the amount of time it's been on the planet or where it might have been stored for decades upon decades. So to know that prop exists and is still like pliable and in its original container and all that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then like you said, like to be able to go and see it in person in the context of Blobfest would be a lot of fun. I think we should do it.
All right, I'm on board. The last thing I'll say before we move on to to its oddball sequel, I also read this story, which I thought was kind of cute. Apparently, decades later, when Steve McQueen was now Steve McQueen, in fact, he's credited in this as Stephen McQueen, the only time
Yeah.
that ever happened. But he's playing a character named Steve, so maybe they didn't want the confusion. But Steve McQueen was at the grocery store, and Jack H. Harris was in line a few people behind him, the producer of the Blob, and they hadn't seen each other in decades, right? And Jack H. Harris is like, should I say anything? I don't know, like it's been a little while, and he hears like the cute girl next to McQueen saying like, "You look familiar. What are you in?" And McQueen's mugging for her, and because McQueen was quite the ladies' man, and he's trying to say, "Well, have you seen the Magnificent Seven? How about Bullet?" And kind of listing off his filmography to see what hits with this girl. And then finally, Jack H. Harris gets the nerve to go, "What about the Blob?" And McQueen looks back in line with like he's ready to strike almost. He's back in the line and sees that it's Jack Harris, gives him a grin, and goes, "Well, it ain't Othello."
That's awesome.
And the way Jack Harris tells another story is apparently one of the last people to see Steve McQueen alive when he was very sick and limited to bed rest in his room. Apparently, the only movie poster in his room on his deathbed was the Blob. So I don't take that as that was the only one he was proud of. I
No,
think there was probably a lot of introspection going on, and the poster for his first movie was
sentimental.
so yeah, something that touched him. But I kind of like that. I wish Steve McQueen was still with us,
Yeah,
but I do like that story. I like the sentimentality of it. So,
absolutely.
but that wasn't Jack Harris's only chance to cash in on the Blob, and I guess that brings us to 1972 for the second Blob entry, uh, also produced by Jack H. Harris, and this time actually written by his son.
Was it actually written? No, I wouldn't know.
Well, he recognized that as well. Uh, where is it? Yeah, his son Anthony Harris wrote the script for. Well, I guess the original title for this one was going to be a chip off the old Blob, which I kind of like.
That actually suits the movie. So
But, it officially became "Beware the Blob," a throwback to the original theme song, and then was re-released as "Son of the Blob." So, but same movie. If you ever see "Beware the Blob" and "Son of the Blob," it's if you're searching online or anything, they're the exact same thing. You're not discovering an alternate cut or anything. James, what you want to give me your thoughts on this film, or
I mean,
was this your first time seeing it?
it was my first time seeing it. We talked about Ed Wood earlier, and for some reason, this movie struck me as what if Robert Altman made a movie and but it was also directed by Ed Wood. Like it's a combination of Robert Altman. Feels spiritually like just
I
kind of
totally see it.
yeah, it kind of meanders through all these scenes of just actors. I don't even know some of the scenes. I don't even know what the fuck is actually honestly happening. The scene in the barbershop, I don't. The dialogue, it's so weird. But
Was this movie sticking it to the hippies, or was this movie pro
I
hippie? I can't
don't,
figure it out.
dude. I'm glad. So it's funny. Of the three movies, this feels the most dated.
Yes,
This feels the most
100%.
of, yeah, and it's very bizarre. I mean, the highlight of the movie for me is Burgess Meredith as this sort of home. He's speaking of hippies. His whole thing is how much he hates hippies and how much they've ruined everything. But he's this, it's so weird. But it's so weird to see Burgess Meredith in the middle of this weird. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of actors in this but there's no the movie's very bizarre. I'm trying to be,
It's almost too weird to exist.
yeah, and I finished it begrudgingly. I will say the ending is excellent. I will say the last 10-15 minutes really works. It actually looks really good. Larry Hagman, who directed it, which is weird. Yes, that Larry Hagman.
Yeah, his
Um,
only directorial effort.
and I mean, that's the thing is, I was gonna say I totally see why, but again, it's the directing isn't the pro. I mean, it is kind of. I mean, I think this. I don't. It's so bizarre. Again, there's no. It's literally just actors chewing scenery that definitely feels like it's like I said, it's very Altman-esque. It's just sort of you kind of bounce between characters and their weird dialogue, and it's very much a product of its time. And it's trying to be tongue in cheek. It's trying to be self-aware. It's trying to be witty, but it's also just kind of fumbles around a lot. The dialogue just some of it is funny, some of it just doesn't work or just too up its own ass. There's some like I said, there's some good aspects to it, and again, some of the young actors in it who I mean, while it does have feature faces of people, you're like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah,
A
a
lot
lot
of
of
the
that, guys.
yeah, but a lot of cast also too is just you've never seen they're a lot of the younger people. If they did other things, I didn't recognize them. I didn't really finishing it. I didn't feel the need to go and research much of it. But it's weird. I feel like there's some things they do pretty smartly, which is, I mean, I don't know what kind of budget it had, but obviously it wasn't a lot. But they did creative ways to sort of allude to with lighting and in-camera effects of backlighting a piece of red silicone or whatever, and then projecting it so it looked bigger. And they did some interesting things with that. But this movie is a Blob movie, incidentally, and not until the end of it does that even honestly really. I mean, it's like go from one sequence to another, but it's just so it's so weird. I mean,
Well, it is technically canon. It does follow after the end of the first movie. Like not
movie.
it doesn't pick up where the other one left off, but spoiler alert on a movie from 1958, they realized that the way to fight the blob is to freeze it.
Freeze it.
And so they use CO2 fire extinguishers and they were able to vanquish the blob. And the ending, I actually think, is really funny for the original Blob, intentionally funny.
Yeah.
Where it's a plane flying over Antarctica and dropping a container where supposedly the blob will be frozen in the tundra forever. They could probably make an interesting movie now on rethawing that. But for this movie, for whatever reason, it's Godfrey Cambridge, who was a big comedian in the 60s and 70s. And I actually think he did a really good job in Melvin Van Peebles' The Watermelon Man. That's what I know him best from. But he plays like an oil driller or something, and they're drilling up in Antarctica. And you don't see any of this. You see him home from the long trip, and he's ready to go fishing. But for some reason, he's fishing in his yard, or he's got a tent set up so he can camp in his living room. This movie makes almost no sense. It really feels like a bunch of stoned celebrities got together and just said, let's make a backyard movie, like the way that we would have in high school. But yeah, Godfrey Cambridge has in his freezer the canister of the blob that they dug up somehow by accident when they were drilling for oil in the Arctic. And he was told to take this home and send it off to the lab to get it analyzed for what it is. So, of course, he just happens to have it sitting in his freezer, and his girlfriend leaves it sitting out and gets a cat, unfortunately. I did wonder what you were thinking of that whole cat opening.
But, yeah. Yeah, you know me well. So that's the funny part about the movie is like there's some of it.
Why did he have it in his freezer? I just want to say that before I move on from the Godfrey Cambridge. But why the fuck did he take it home and stick? Who says, "Oh, my boss said this is a weird scientific sample. I'll take it in next week. I can just store it in my freezer with my food until then." But anyways,
oh no, just so much of the movie. There's just so many tonal shifts. Even though the whole movie is played on purpose, kind of like they're taking it seriously enough that it's a real movie, but they're kind of not taking it seriously, like at all. Like
they're treating it a little too much like they're doing a spin-off of Laugh-In at times.
Yeah,
and
yes,
it's very much Larry Hagman and his friends.
Just
I'll get into like how that all happened in a minute, but I want to get your opinion.
Yeah, I don't have. I mean, to me, the sequence in the when the one of the young hippies gets a haircut and he goes in, and it's basically just an old man fucking with. Well, also like. It's so weird. There's like, first of all, there's a lot of like weird homoerotic, like there's a lot of like I don't know if they're doing it. It's
the
so
weird banter between the barber and the hippie. You mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre, and it's like on one hand, I'm like, maybe I need to rewatch this.
I'm definitely gonna rewatch it. I want to get the Blu-ray because
was that Kino.
It is Kino, yeah. You can rent it. Maybe I'll rent it, but the Blu-ray is actually pretty cheap. But it looks like they've really cleaned up the picture a lot. And the version I saw was streaming for free on Plex with ads.
So it's actually on YouTube, and it didn't look bad. It actually looked, it looks pretty good.
I was going to bring that up. I did notice that there was a Kino logo on the YouTube version. I wish that I'd seen that because it would have saved me the ads too. But in my head, I'm like, oh, this must be better than any YouTube version. It's murky, but maybe that's part of the fun of a movie this bad. But
like I said, I will say the final, like basically when it becomes an act, like there's a lot of homages to the original Blob, and
there's this whole teenagers who are not being believed and
trapped inside of the play. Like there's some vibe to it, but. It's actually really well shot. There's a sequence where it's like you see this kid, he's trying to get above it, and he's climbing this rope. And I was like, that's actually this feels like Towering Inferno. Like it looks different than, there's some really good camera placement, and it looks good. And like I said, I will say I was sort of checked out mentally towards the end, but then the ending is great. The ending is definitely it's saying something about authority and ineptitude, and yeah. And then again, there's it's like it's not a twist ending, but anyways, I thought the
kind of
ending
is, but you see it coming a million miles.
exactly. You see it coming from the second the movie starts, but
it is anti-authority, which is not a movie that I necessarily expected from. Like at this point, he's not JR yet, but he's known for Major Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie, and I know that he's not that character, but he's so straight-laced as Major Nelson that I always kind of saw Larry Hagman as straight-laced. As I get to know more about him, I definitely see him as more of a lefty and a whatever. But in this film, I think kind of seals that. I have no problems believing that Larry Hagman was a big old pothead at this point.
Oh yeah, well it was 72. Everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure Burgess Meredith was probably stoned out of his gourd in this movie.
So why don't you talk about the actual then? I mean, this is a great opportunity. Tell us exactly how the film got made, how it got made the way it did.
Well, Jack Harris ended up living next door to Larry Hagman, and just through neighborly conversation, Larry Hagman found out that he had produced the Blob and owned the rights to the Blob, and he had never seen the Blob, and he let this be known. And so Harris insisted that he bring over his personal 16 millimeter print over to Larry Hagman's house, and he got such a kick out of the movie. He told Harris that if he would allow him to direct the sequel, he could get a bunch of his famous friends to come out. He says they would just be lining up to be quote unquote blobbed. So he saw this as just an opportunity for his friends to fuck around and do something fun. My guess is that even for a couple of guys like us that tend to, if not know every name, at least recognize a lot of faces, I bet you a lot slip past us too. Like I'm willing to bet that the barber and the hippie, those two are somebodies at the time. I just don't know who the hell they are.
Yeah. Oh well,
every
like
single little piece
his
is
voice was the young hippie with the long hair. The crazy look, his weird looking dude, but his voice is very familiar. But the barber himself, I'm like, this has got to be some 50s actor. His face is very memorable, and
someone.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody
with Henny Youngman, But he did get together a good group of his friends to just kind of do this silly thing. And like I said, the writer of the film, Jack Harris's son, Anthony Harris, has full on said that the most of the material was improvised and that his script was ignored. Doesn't seem like he's too hurt by that. I think he enjoyed making the movie too. But just to go down like a partial list of some of the names that people would recognize, Godfrey Cambridge, as I mentioned before, Garrett Graham from Phantom of Paradise shows up in a monkey suit. Dick
I was like, oh shit, is that
Dick Van Patten's in it. Sid Haig is in it.
First off, okay, let's see. That's another again because you're like, this is Dick Van Patten. He's a very famous actor, and he plays this weird scout leader, and you're like, what is he doing in this movie? And what's this character? And like, it's so weird. I'm sorry but just again, I grew up. I'm in my mid 40s. I grew up when 8 Is Enough was, a very popular show in repeats and, in reruns and in syndication. And, and again, he's Dick Van Patten. He's very well known. And just seeing him in this weird role, like this it's just so weird, man. I don't know another way to say it. The movie's just weird. But anyways, go ahead. Let's more people.
It's also got an early appearance by Cindy Williams of Laverne and Shirley and American Graffiti fame. Burgess Meredith, you already mentioned. Larry Hagman plays one of the bums with Burgess Meredith in that scene. Tiger Joe Marsh, who I thought maybe you would know as a wrestler. He's the weird, like, naked Russian dude.
Yeah, which is funny because he's not like a big dude. Like he's fat, but I didn't know. I honestly didn't. I've heard the name, but I didn't know who he was. But I could totally see that. Yeah.
And then there's an actor that I didn't know, but there's a link here. There's a reason why I saved him for last. But his name is Del Close. He's the other bum in the scene.
Yeah, he will come up later.
He will. Okay, well, we'll bring him up later when we bring him up then, and I'll save that for the next thing. But There's a couple of other little surprises on this that kind of blink and you miss it, or miss your research and you miss it. First off, the bowling alley that the third act takes place in is the same building as Jack Rabbit Slim's in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, I did read that. Yes,
Yes.
I just read that actually.
And did you know it was an early Dean Kundi movie?
No, I didn't.
He was not the cinematographer on it. He was in charge of filming the scenes with the animals. So he did the kitten scene that started the movie.
The star of the movie. Yeah.
Uh, and he does the scene with the kitten getting in the house, and then there's a dog scene as well. I think the kitten scene is primarily what he worked on, but he got a credit for it. I don't know if it's his first
I remember
credit.
just as soon as we started, and it was just like 5 minutes of a cat meowing, and I was like, "What the fuck is this movie? What is this? The Blob? Am I watching the right movie?" No, of course I liked it. Though. I like
No,
cats,
it's
but
the cutest cat, but the whole time
little
you're
little
thinking
tiny.
they're not going to kill the cat, are they? They're not going to kill the cat
That's exact. I thought a Blob is going to come in and just absorb it. Yeah,
because it's
like
not. It's a kitten. It's a little
it's a
baby
little
kitten.
kitten
And
mewing.
and to me, like this isn't me saying that Larry Hagman is not a good person. I know nothing about him personally. He might have been a jackass. He might have been really cool, but I think it shows that he didn't know what he was doing, because nobody would start the movie with like an entire credit sequence of a kitten that you plan to kill in 5 minutes in a movie that's meant to be essentially a horror comedy.
Yeah,
Like it just goes to show just how tonally this movie is all over the fucking place. Whereas the first one, the original, I think, is the most tonally consistent of all three of them. But the last thing I'll say, because I don't want to waste too much time on Beware the Blob, or actually, there's two things I'll say. First off, I think it's an interesting timepiece film. We've talked about this before. It's not a good movie. It's a very difficult movie to recommend unless you're somebody who really is, like a cinematic masochist who loves movies that are so bad they're bad.
yeah.
But it is recorded. It's filmed in like the Valley area of Los Angeles County, and you get locations galore. Like I said, the bowling alley from Jackrabbit Slims, things like that. And it does seem to actually capture the legitimate like remnants of hippie culture in 1972.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this as an historian, I would actually say there's far more historical value to this movie than there is like entertainment value in a weird way, because all these people are driving their own cars,
Yeah, wearing their own wardrobe.
wearing their own wardrobe. Yeah, exactly. Aside from the hippie and the barbershop scene, most of them don't seem to be wearing wigs.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool in that sense. And then the other funny thing I want to point out, just because it's too ridiculous to not point out, is that of course they re-released this movie in 1982. This may have been when the title "Son of the Blob" came out, but the tagline on the poster to show what they were capitalizing on: the movie that JR shot.
Oh my God. Of course they did. That's
So
pretty.
if you think that is top-notch wit, then you might love this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because it exists, and again, it's you can understand why in 1972 they would decide to make it that way, because nobody was going to seriously make a Blob sequel.
Yeah, it was really the only way anything was going to come of this at this
Yeah.
point in time.
But there's a reason it didn't get. There's a reason it hasn't been played on TV or why we distribute it. So
Yeah, it's dumb fun though, legitimately, and I will see it again. I guarantee. I don't know whether I'll go through and buy the Blu-ray. Although there's that little part of me that always thinks, well, if I don't buy the Blu-ray, this will never be released again. And when it goes away, it's probably going to go away forever. So if you want to own this little slice of hippie culture history, then yeah, by all means, buy Beware the Blob. But I endorse it on that level, let's say.
I can support that.
Which this brings us forward into 1988. Why don't you? I think you're the one who has the closer connection to this film. Why don't you set us up for Blob 88?
Sure. Came out on the 30th anniversary, like, it was 30 years after. So the filmmakers wanted to take a pass at doing it and doing it more seriously. By at this point, the effects were much better. It's still, the production was plagued because while they had a much bigger effects budget. In fact, I think the movie was, out of $19 million, it was 9 of it went to, or maybe 10 of it went to the special effects. And again, that was pretty common in this heyday. It was co-written and directed by Chuck Russell, who, he had a very strong understanding of what it was. And it was written, though, by Frank Darabont, famous of being Frank Darabont, of being the most famous adapter. The Shawshank Redemption, and a million things. He's Frank Darabont. Look him up if you don't know him. The Mist, again, the most able adapter of Stephen King material, and a big Stephen King fan. Apparently, there's a bunch of Stephen King references in this movie that every time I watch it, I go, well, let me look out for the Stephen King references, because that Frank Darabont has been a lifelong fan, but I every time I actually sit down and watch it, I forget that that's the thing. I don't want to look it up because I don't want it to be spoiled. But apparently, if you've watched it, you might already know it. But I need to rewatch it and try to specifically look for the. I have a feeling some of them are really obvious, and I'll hate myself for not realizing it. But but it's very. Plot wise, it's very similar. They didn't rename the characters. They didn't use the names of but the overall story. Few things I'll say right at first. So it stars Shawnee Smith, who she happened to be in a lot of movies I loved around this period in the late 80s and early 90s, but she didn't work for a long time. Most famously, she's got famous from the Saw films.
I know her from Summer School.
Summer School, exactly. This and Summer School, I love her in both. She was a great in these films, and very believable and very endearing. Slightly left of center. Not, she's not the stereotypical 80s actress. She looked a little more unique. She had a unique aspect to her.
Doesn't fit into any of those like 80s categories that they seem to want actresses to fit in that time,
Absolutely.
Especially in teenage movies. You had the good girl, the slut, that's just kind of how they cast these movies back then. And she really just seems like a legitimately normal person.
Yeah, like a real person. But also, like I said, she's very likable, very sweet. She's actually really great in like the fact that she didn't become a scream queen. Honestly, and I don't say this with any. I love Scream. I grew up loving Scream queens. I respect my Scream queens, but she was a bit. If I'm being very honest, she's probably a more capable actress than the most of the quote unquote Scream queens.
Yeah,
but she is one of the best all time screams and scared faces, which she does a lot in this film.
Chuck Russell actually said Shawnee Smith is ultimately the Steve McQueen character, if there is one.
Yes. Yeah. Well, okay. We'll get into this. The film star, first of all, it opens. I feel like this is a movie I could talk about all night, but I don't want to because the two main heroes, the two main stars are Shawnee Smith and Kevin Dillon. Donovan Leitch has a role at the beginning. You think he's going to have a bigger role than he actually ends up having. But Kevin Dillon is the sort of hero. Him and Shawnee Smith. They're first off, the scariest thing about this movie is Kevin Dillon's face. I've said this before, but he looks like a fucking caveman on methamphetamines. Like I don't know who thought he was going to be a star. Matt Dillon, his brother, who was. I've
seen Matt Dillon in person. He's fucking an Adonis. He's gorgeous. Yeah.
Kevin Dillon is not. Kevin Dillon got all the regressive genes in that man. Like he looks a lot like his brother, but is also like the dollar bin version, the Wish version of.
He's a little like Matt Dillon with some of the air let out.
Yeah, exactly. Like he looks like he has like 6 or 7 extra chromosomes.
We're being so mean. He plays assholes, but maybe he's a sweetheart. I don't know.
Yeah, but he's just so weird looking, and then he has an awful haircut, which apparently he had the exact same haircut as a lady that our neighbor used to have in the late 80s. This awful, weird. I'm not going to call it. I don't know what it was, but the ugliest haircut in the history of cinema. And I found out that fucking Chuck Russell made Shawnee Smith and Kim Dillon wear hair extensions because Shawnee Smith had short hair and he wanted her to have more of a girl next door. And I guess he just wanted fucking poor Kevin Dillon to look more like a moron. It's the worst fucking haircut. Plus he wears like this fucking
he
gunslinger shirt.
into that hair. It makes his face look even smaller.
Yeah, dude,
What
he's
the
all like
fuck?
jaw and cheeks, but anyways, terrible. And he's so unlikable. That's the other thing. Like, I genuinely love this movie, and I'll get more into that in a second. But Kevin Dillon almost ruins it for me. I don't like his character. Where the thing that separates, the Steve character, Steve McQueen in the first film, he was a likable guy. He's just a normal guy
He's
trying to do right.
affable. You, you
Yeah,
you'd want to hang out with them,
yeah, exactly. You
and
wanted to
you'd
be his
probably be
buddy.
okay with your daughter dating him.
Yeah. Kevin Dillon, on the other hand, plays the quintessential '80s, just like ill-tempered, rebels against anything. This kind of like bad boy, but he's just a fucking jerk.
He's
He's
just like
unlikable.
he's just slightly more aggressive than say Nick from Family Ties, but without any of the creative flair.
Yeah, or any of the likable, like stupid. He's just
Yeah,
mean and stupid. And a guy he's so weirdly cast in this. I mean, I'm sure on paper that's exactly who they, like that. But
the
he
character's
just,
probably fine. I don't think that I'm ever going to end up working with Kevin Dillon at any point in the
yeah.
future, so I have no problems.
And then,
I think it's him. I think it's him. I think
yeah.
the character was probably fine.
But again, though, he was very stereotypical of a film in this period where
Yes,
the teenager
yes.
couldn't have been a sweet, nice guy next door. He had to be, because that's like the Donovan Leitch. He's like a football player. He seems like just a normal, guy next door. No, here's one thing. So the film is very similar in tone, but far more vicious, far scarier, far more violent. We'll get there. But for the longest time, I really wondered why this movie, because again, I was a fan as a kid. I was 11, I guess, in '88, so probably 12 when it came to rental, and that was right at the time where I was really getting into watching a lot of horror movies.
That's peak age for this.
Yeah, and it was one of the very few that actually kind of bothered me. The scene in the where the fucking, and it still holds up as one of the most uncomfortable, just scary scenes. And there's a lot in this film. But when the dishwasher guy gets sucked down the sink, it's just disturbing. I mean, when Donovan Leitch gets murdered, which is like he's like the first like real gnarly death in the movie. That also, but anyways, but for the longest time, I'm like, this movie's like genuinely really scary. It's genuinely it's a fun '80s movie, really well acted for the most part, well shot, well constructed, especially compared to some of the other '80s horror films, which I'm a fan of all of them for the most part. But I say it was a very competently made movie for a remake of the 1950 Blob. But for the longest time, I wondered why it wasn't. It's only in the last, I'd say, decade, maybe even less, where I really started to see this movie pop up again, as far as people remembering it, appreciating it, where it's starting to pop up amongst other movies of its similar time frame and whatever, as a sort of cult classic. But for a long time, nobody gave a shit. In fact, I remember somebody it's probably a book I still own, which was the collection of horror movies, and it gave it a terrible fucking review.
Yeah.
And but the thing I realized is because I think tonally it's so, on one hand, there's like one of the whole opening sequences is this stupid, and very much at the time of like the two, Donovan Leitch's best friend, who's kind of like this jerky. He goes to buy condoms, but meanwhile the local reverend or whatever, the local priest,
the priest,
played by Del Close, who was the hippie or the homeless guy with a patch in the sequel. We'll talk about Dillon in a second. But he's like trying to buy a condom, and it's a whole thing where like he blames on his buddy and the pharmacist, who's unnecessarily aggressive and bitter about the whole thing about this young guy buying condoms. Ooh, how terrible. Anyways, he blames on his buddy and basically makes his buddy look like a sleazebag. And then, of course, turns out Donovan Leitch is the buddy, and he goes, "Who's the girl he's going to pick up?" The pharmacist's daughter, and it's this whole like
the pharmacist now thinks that those condoms were purchased for
his daughter, for Shawnee Smith, and it's this very typical '80s movie. But it shifts from that to some of the most gruesome, disturbing on-screen murders honestly in film history. I mean, to me, it holds up with something like The Thing, or it's fucking gross, but also very well done. It's truly disturbing. The deaths are truly disturbing. And so it's this weird, like, people, I don't think people understood it, they just weren't expecting this, like, and amongst the vein of like, this is the era of Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
This is exactly the year of Killer
Yeah,
Clowns,
exactly.
which was essentially a tribute to the Blob.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's a lot like Invaders from Mars. There's a lot of like homages to 50s sci-fi horror and stuff, drive-in horror, but where those movies are all sort of tongue-in-cheek and have a sense of humor about itself, or at least this movie also, like I said, has a sense of humor. There's this whole great sequence where Johnny Smith's little brother and his friend are in the movie theater and replicating that, and there's a lot of fun. I mean, they're going to see the Garden Tool Massacre, which is they're very much, like parodying like 80s slashers, which by 88 had definitely started to like jump the shark a little bit.
Absolutely.
And but again, and there's a lot of comedy in that scene. But again, once the murders start happening, there's nothing funny about it. And I love that aspect of it. I love the fact that it's this fun horror movie, but when the shit hits the fan, they're not pulling punches, and like they're not. This isn't a piece of red silicone being dragged in front of the camera. Like,
this ain't your dad's Blob.
Exactly. One of the things I find really interesting is the concept. Like, they didn't have a lot of rule. Like, when they sat down to write the script, they didn't want to spend too much time going, what is the like Blob? But what they came up with was that Chuck Russell and Darabont said, basically, the Blob in this isn't just like a red gelatin. It's essentially a giant stomach that's been turned inside out, so all the stomach acid is on the outside. And depending on how strong and how big it's gotten, it basically, the stomach acid gets stronger and stronger, so it quickly absorbs. Yeah, and there's tons of,
and it's gross.
It's gross. Yeah,
it's so cool.
One thing I will say, there's some inconsistencies, and then looking it up, it made more sense because the effects had a lot of issues and like trying to get it to work, and then the people making it and changing people. But sometimes the Blob itself changes into like what it looks like from scene to scene as far as like how it works. But essentially, it is this big organic mass, but it has tendrils and stuff.
It's veiny now.
Veiny, and it's very wet looking, but it's fucking disgusting.
It's pockets of made of silk, right?
Yeah, so it's made of a lot of things, and it was I guess an anime. I mean, there's some of it was stop motion, some of it was literally just they had different versions apparently of it. But yeah, there was the composition of it they had different versions of it. But that's why I said one of them what part was silk, which is weird. But like I said, some of it was coated in that thickening agent used for milkshakes and stuff. But it's fucking disgusting. And there's one scene there's so many great kills in this movie, which as a horror fan, that's something I talk about all day. But there's this really great sequence, which again, I think is a little more self-aware or a little bit more progressive for a movie in the 80s, where there's this kind of scummy, slime bally Donovan Leitch's high school buddy is on this date. He's the one with the condoms. But his girlfriend is passed out in the front seat of his car. And this is where it's really like a 50s driving movie. But she's passed out, and he's basically making playfulness that he's going to fucking feel her up, basically assault her if she's unconscious. And in any
very
film,
80s scene,
very 80s. But unlike other 80s scene where that's sort of a boys will be boys sort of forgiven, this is like this sort of moral comeuppance where he goes to reach his hand in her bra as she's unconscious, and he finds a blob, and has a very disgusting scene where her face sort of sucks in, which is again was another moment that kind of traumatized 12-year-old me. But then like all these fucking tendrils kind of come out of her orifices. It's fucking gross, but it's a
great effect scene.
Great,
and it's really effective the way she kind of just sort of collapses in his arms. But I will say, I had obviously thoughts about the rapiness of the scene too. And I think that was genuinely what he was trying to go for, what Russell was trying to go for in directing that scene, was the comeuppance. I will say that it still doesn't work in that sense. It works as an effect scene, of course. It works as a scare. But I don't think it works as comeuppance, because she has to die first. Like, she gets like she loses worse than he does, as far as we know.
True. That I mean, that's a good point, but I
But
guess I
but
would.
that but that's a point looking back from 2022.
Yeah, exactly.
But it did stick out to me.
I mean that is a good
I'm not
point.
going
I
to
would
judge the
argue
movie on
that
that.
she was going to die anyways because if the blob is in the car and but he like I said I don't know. I mean I guess I see your point. I guess thinking of it specifically always in hindsight because that was a scene even as 12 years old sort of like oh dude like that's what you
Yeah,
get pervert or whatever you
yeah,
jerk.
totally. It worked for 88.
Hey, yeah, I guess you're right. In a modern context, she could have survived. Like, although I don't know how you play that.
She could have at least outlived him. In this
Yeah,
case, he's only able to get to like his he's only able to steal second base because she's already dead.
yeah, that's a good point. And this was in an era where we were rooting for guys that like Revenge of the Nerds and stuff, which is just in hindsight so goddamn uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's not the point of why I necessarily brought it up, but yeah.
No, but I mean, like I said, it's definitely an interesting scene because there is that context to it. And again, in another '80s movie, it would have maybe been played for laughs, or he was definitely a character that had it coming, and that the film lets you know.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, I think it's paced really well. I think it follows its. There's definitely an anti-authority thing in this, and the government's, like every '80s horror movie where the government's involved, the government are corrupt, fucked up, inept.
Well, that's the big twist in this one. That's where
Yes.
it really strays from the original, and why. I mean, good on them. They had to do something to update it because they couldn't just do the fallen meteorite again.
Yeah.
And they couldn't go back to the Arctic and get
The remnants of it. Yeah.
yeah. So I applaud them for that. But it reminded me a little bit of Evil Dead 2 in that sense, which came out around the same time too, the year prior actually, where it felt like the first half or so was actually a remake, and the second half was like more new material. And I
Yeah.
like that. That kept it fresh. That got the Easter eggs out of the way quick, so to
Yep.
speak.
I agree.
So I did like that element.
It's weird. There's a lot of weird parallels for me with Return of the Living Dead and Return of the Living Dead 2. And I don't know if that's
Return of the Living Dead 2 came out the same year too.
yeah, and I mean it's just I don't know if that's because I probably saw them, around the same time or would probably
Yeah.
rewatch them together.
They would have been on the new release shelf together, I'm sure.
But there's just a weird vibe to it. But ultimately, I think if you're a fan of practical effects, if you're a fan of inventive kills, if you're a fan of monsters, because that's the thing is, and this is why I still hold up to this day in films like Life and films that the monster isn't a bipedal humanoid creature with claws and fangs or magic powers. It places the monster on this sort of ambiguous life form that that's stripped of any kind of humanity. You can't even personify it or project any sort of intention on it other than survival or whatever, or whatever intention you want to project on it. But it is far scarier to think like that something like this could actually exist. We probably don't have vampires. I say probably, because I don't want to be a complete naysayer, but there's
especially not in October.
Exactly. But I doubt there's any Rawhead Rexes or any Jason Voorheeses, but there could be a life form out there from another planet who, and if another life form on another planet existed, it probably would look more like a giant amoeba. Like it probably. I mean, I say that with any kind of like I'm some sort of scientific biologist, biology expert in alien life forms. But I mean, like there's a believability that something truly alien would be alien even in concept, where we don't understand its physics, we don't understand its motivations. Anyways, you get what I'm saying.
Absolutely. But, and they really pull that off. But you made me think of something else. These scientists that come from the government, basically, I don't want to make this one quite as spoiler-tastic as the original Blob, because there's probably more people that haven't seen this one. But I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say this is a government conspiracy. It turns out that this was the Blob was like a bacteria that has mutated based on the government messing with its basic structure and DNA. And so in this town, you've got all these like super scientists that are there specifically to deal with the Blob, but yet somehow all these super scientists in their like the crazies hazmat suits and
Yep,
whatever, somehow they've all been Navy SEAL trained and like motorcycle chase trained.
that's right.
It's, I just not maybe not a true criticism, but it is something that made me giggle when I was watching it this last time. I'm like, wait a minute, how are they so good on fucking racing on mini bikes?
Right. No,
Like,
but
I thought these were like the government nerds.
yeah, that's the thing is though, in the 80s, all scientists were also like demolition experts and yeah, like Navy SEAls and Green Berets.
Knew their way
Part of me,
around an AR-15.
part of me watching it was wondering because there's a kind of an ET vibe
Yes.
where it's like these bad scientists in the white, or these like yeah, like the scary scientists in white suits are coming after the alien, but instead of being friendly, home, phone home, it's a fucking murderous, gelatinous stomach monster thing.
Yeah, I think
But
it has. I think the thing is, or I'm sorry, the Blob is obviously its daddy, but I think that this movie has some like very interesting cousins.
yes,
Uh, and I would say that's the thing, the crazies and the stuff.
yes,
I think
absolutely.
all kind of like morph into this in really well. That's not a criticism.
I will definitely say, yeah, I watching it, I even watching it, in my 20s, if you don't immediately think these guys definitely watched the thing, some of the tendril aspect of it, a lot of things where you're like,
And they would have had to have loved the thing because this
oh yeah,
is 1988 with the thing coming out in 82 and being pretty much universally reviled upon its
yeah,
release. So these guys, in trying to make a new product, um, they would have really had to have loved the thing and fought for elements of the thing to be in it against a studio that was probably like, "Are you crazy? Nobody liked that."
oh, I guarantee you, Frank Darabont, and I bet we could look this up and find this out, but there's no way Frank Darabont wasn't a huge fan of the thing.
Oh,
Like,
that's fully confirmed in the Mist because one of the posters that
oh, that's right. Yes, the thing.
is the
Exactly.
poster for the thing.
Exactly. I can't believe I didn't forget that because that's my whole thing. My favorite is the main character in the movie, not in the novel, but
Or even
in
the
the movie,
creatures in
it's
the
basically
Mist have some similarities to this
things. Yeah.
incarnation of the thing and this
The Blob.
incarnation of the Blob.
But so one thing I thought about real quickly as we kind of wrap this up is that um I would like I would find it interesting to like review, like to give a solid like numerical review to these films, like a out of 5 stars sort of scenario. Because I'm really curious what yours would be. Because I can tell you, if I were to give a out of 5 star rating to each of these, I would give the original Blob a 3.5, which I feel like
That's pretty damn good.
was pretty damn good, especially for it, what it is. I would give Son of the Blob or Beware the Blob maybe a 2,
Mhm.
maybe a 2.5, or even possibly a 3 out of sheer oddity or sheer like you got to see this weird ass Blob movie.
Yeah.
But I would actually go so far as to give a good solid 4 stars off for me. For me, and I'm a sort of I realize I do have a sort of soft spot for 80s horror. I mean, obviously, if you watch this podcast, you know that. But watch this podcast. Well, I guess you can watch it on YouTube. But if you're a fan of the podcast, it should go without saying I'm a fan of 80s horror. But I also just again, I think this horror movie, if the only thing I would change is Kevin Dillon, or at least Kevin Dillon's face slash haircut. I just can't get over his weird face, and that's cruel, I know. But anyways, I'm going to hell. But I just think it. I think it. The effects work is such an accomplishment. I think the kills are some of the greatest kills in cinema history, and I'd say that like defiantly and very confidently that I will put the kills in this film up to definitely any kill in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
There might be kills just as good, but I can't think of a kill that's more effective.
Some of the aftermaths of the kills too, like the way you find out about the sheriff,
Yep.
for example, is just
you find out about
gross.
Find out about the homeless, the bum when they pull it's like completely unexpected. But yeah, I would give it as a horror movie, as a genre lover, I would definitely give this a solid 4 out of 5 stars for myself. So
I'm a little lower than that. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think it's going to be any surprise to the people that listen to us regularly where
we fall.
I believe true objectivity when judging the arts does not come from standing at the center and looking outwards. I believe that objectivity comes from approaching the center to meet the movie halfway.
Yeah.
So that even if you don't particularly love a movie, if you can see what the filmmaker was going for in this production, or you can see, you understand studio involvement or whatever. I think that to truly be able to judge a movie, you should reach out on some level and know a little bit about the movie, whether it's a low budget movie, whether it's a big budget movie, whether there were studio problems. To truly judge it, you would have to know some of this. Otherwise, if you're not grading on a curve, you're not understanding art. Is basically what I'm saying.
I agree with that. In fact, I've heard
especially commercial art.
I don't want to interrupt, but just because it's so relevant, I just heard this quote yesterday on a metal review YouTube channel called Banger TV about reviewing and the integrity of being a reviewer of reviewing artistic enterprises. And it's like, look, like anything that has all art has value to inherently in and of itself, whether you appreciate it or not. But specifically, anything that has been produced, published, or put money behind, it's because somebody believed it, somebody saw value in it. And you might not be like, I might not be an expert in progressive atmospheric black metal. I'm just using this as a weird example. But that doesn't mean that atmospheric, black and whatever doesn't have value in itself. And just because I don't get it doesn't mean that somebody who does get it doesn't mean that they don't have a. I'm fucking up this whole. In fact, why don't you do it?
No,
but
you're making sense. I totally get it. Like if it's your taste and your own subjective opinions are going to come into anything and everything that you talk about, and critics are not immune from that, nor should they be.
No, and that's the thing is like somebody who's if you're going to take somebody's opinion on something, like say a 1950s drive-in horror film, inherently, even though I don't subscribe to the idea that all opinions are valid or all opinions are equal. I don't actually subscribe to that.
I completely disagree with the idea that all opinions are valid.
I disagree with that, and we won't get too into that or into politics, but I definitely don't agree with that. And with that, like if I were to take two people, you, Devin, and my 55-year-old boss she loves scrapbooking and college football. If I were to go, hey, what's your review of the Blob? I'm going to trust you because I know that besides the fact that, you're just a film lover, you also understand film context, film history, what a 1950s monster movie was, what the intentions were, the history. So to me, your opinion is more valid than that. So I don't know. This is I feel like I'm not making as much sense as I'm making in my head. But
no, you're making perfect sense, and I am completely on board. I completely agree. My opinion is always the best one.
Yes, exactly.
But no, within the context of, this is kind of when somebody's really studied something, and I'm not talking about the individual something, I'm talking about the overall subject of something, such as film itself or genre itself.
Yep.
The more that person researches, the more they're able to wrap their subjectivity into their objectivity and to, like I said before, like meet something halfway rather than expect it to come to you halfway.
Yes.
And I'm guilty of this too. Like I won't watch the Twilight movies just because I know I won't like them at this point. Like it won't be fair of me to watch the Twilight movies and have an opinion on them because I disliked the idea of them when they first came out so much. But I also understand that just makes me the wrong person to listen to about Twilight movies. It doesn't make someone who loves the Twilight movies wrong per se, provided that they're coming from an intellectual perspective, on film. Because I do know people that have great opinions on film and love the Twilight movies.
Yeah, and I think I've always been, this is my personal belief is like, look, and I used to live for getting in arguments online, and then I realized what a soul-sucking, fruitless endeavor that was. I used to like to get into debate, and I think there's a part of me that likes discussion and stuff,
and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally what this podcast is. But I used to say, I'm like, it's okay if you disagree with me, as long as you can articulate why you think I'm wrong, and you can express thought and understanding and motivation, and you're self-aware enough to know why you feel the way you do and able to express yourself. Cool. Well, even if I strongly disagree with you, cool. I respect your opinion. But if you just go, that movie sucks, why? Because it sucks, or this movie's awesome. Why? Because it's fucking awesome. Like if you can't
because all romantic comedies suck.
yeah,
or,
exactly,
you know,
exactly. All Star Wars movies suck, or
all movies
all
starring
Marvel
Kevin
movies are
Dillon suck.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's just. But and I feel like 95% of the people that is sort of their go-tos. It's like, oh, it sucks because it sucks. And it's like, well, that's not the way the world works, but okay. But anyways,
And I think at its purest, the thing that you want to remember the most about how to be critical of things, art in particular, is that it is not my job, it is not your job to tell people they should or should not see something or should or should not enjoy something. Uh, we do that because that's part of the job description, but the heart of our job is to create the discussion.
Yeah.
Criticism is not to endorse or deny. It is simply to get people talking so they can create their own opinions, and that way it's not a battle royale when people disagree with one another.
Yes, and I think one thing that you and I have, Devin, and I think it's why we've always been good friends, and even the other film friends we have, is like we don't. I don't enjoy tearing a movie apart. I think I'm known amongst good friends as being kind of like a critic of things, and but I don't, especially at this age, I would much rather celebrate the things and focus on things that I genuinely love and really put any small amount of power behind my voice or whatever sort of ability I have to, you know, celebrate the things I enjoy rather than just tearing apart the things I hate. Because that there's not enough hours in the day to waste on just shitting on something.
Well, as Cleveland Brown put it on Family Guy, I like to like things.
Yeah, exactly. And I get a childlike enthusiasm and wonder out of discovering new, whether it's new music, new albums, new bands, or if it's rediscovering an old film I'd never seen, and or rewatching an old film I used to not like, and then discovering, wow, I was a fucking idiot. This movie is great. Like I live for that. So, and that's why I love doing this podcast with you, because you and I, we try, even in the movies we don't like, which come up, we try to at least be diplomatic around it and celebrate. Like, look, this may not be my kind of movie, but these are the reasons why I think it, what they were trying to do, the things they might have been successful at. Because again, like, I know people who just love to like tear things down. And I think, in fact, if you've ever been on the internet, I'm sure you've noticed people just love to fucking tear things down, or just to say how much something sucks, or to spew hate on something. And it's like, I would much rather, again, talk about a weird 1950s horror movie, or sci-fi movie, or weird old monster movie, and how great it is. I think that's a much better use of my time.
Why waste your time and an opinion on something that you're not going to like anyways? Like,
yeah.
Oh, even if you don't like the artist, enter into the film wanting to like it. That's part of the meeting halfway.
Yeah.
Walk in wanting this to not be a waste of your time. Don't look at it like you're handing them something with that.
Yeah.
This is purely for yourself. This is selfish. Walk into every movie wanting it to not be a waste of your $10 in 2 hours.
100%. And I said this recently, and I felt like it was such an obvious statement, but in these days where people review bomb films before they've even seen them, just because they have an agenda, they don't want the movie to succeed, or they're mad that the studio changed something, or it's like they're mad if they cast a person of color in a role that's not, whatever the scenario is. But people love to just talk shit, and I'm like, look, I don't care. As long I care about is if this is good, and I'm hoping it is. I have nothing to win from a movie coming out and having it suck. I would much rather nothing but great movies be made, because I like movies and I like watching them, and I know people. I have friends that made movies, who continue to make movies, who've tried to make movies, and it's something that a lot of people spend a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into. And I get no enjoyment out of something coming out and not being successful. But all I care at the end of the day, I don't care if they cast an actor I don't normally like. I don't care if they change the novel, or whether it's a sequel or a remake. All I care at the end of the day is how successful of a movie was it. That's all I care about. And
was it any good? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, that's it. That's all that matters at the end of the day. It doesn't matter all of the things that we want to project on a movie out of our personal bias or whatever. Now, with that said, I totally just steamrolled over your rating.
Well,
And I
and I can be very hyperbolic too, so I understand that there's a natural hypocrisy to it that exists within criticism as well.
Yeah.
But I think we've proven our point. And to just very quickly run down, I would say that if I was giving a historical review to the original Blob, I would give that like a 3.5 or 4 out of 5 because of what it represents, because of the legacy it's had. If I'm sitting there and watching it in 1958, I think it would maybe be more of a 3 out of 5 than a 3.5 or 4. As far as Son of the Blob or Beware the Blob, I tend to agree with you on that one. It's about a 2. I really enjoyed it. It's hard to recommend. It's as a movie, it's less than okay, but as an enjoyment, it's better than okay. But on no level is it spectacular. And for the Blob remake, I would give that maybe a 3 out of 5. Just because I agree with you. I think they did some really creative, interesting things with it. I love the monster. The monster's fucking crazy. The kills are crazy. I love that they pull a Hitchcock psycho by killing off the person that you think is going to be the lead.
Yeah.
Like almost right off the bat, he's one of the first to go, and he goes horribly. It may be my favorite. Like the plumbing death, the getting pulled in, like that's the one that sticks out to people. That's certainly the one that stuck out to me growing up. But I think that the other one is so much meaner in terms
it's become iconic
of the way that we've seen it, what we're shown. The death in the drain is at least still mostly contained to the drain, and you're not seeing it. You're seeing this kid like screaming, and it's the actor poking through the stuff. Yeah. And Shawnee Smith
that's literally
didn't know they were going to do that either. So that's her legit expression on her face too.
Yeah, and that image of him basically trying to escape it, that's become like the de facto image for the movie. But apparently, that really felt. Donovan Leitch said he really felt like he was suffocating.
Yeah, it's been compared to like it feels like waterboarding. Yeah.
And I can imagine, and somebody who's claustrophobic, that I
also think that the movie tries to be funnier than it is, and I think yes, there's some funniness. I think the funniness is usually mixed up in the special effects. When they try to put the funniness into the characters, you end up with the condom gag, which is kind of funny, but really not that funny. Where the father of the pharmacist turns out to be the father, but even more so, there's the scene where that actually gets very date rapey. He goes to mix her a cocktail while they're up in the car, and he opens up his trunk, and he has like a whole bar set up in his trunk. Yeah. And I don't just mean he has a bunch of alcohol. I mean he has a full tiki bar with like an open canister of strawberries.
Yeah.
And
it's literally like something out of Airplane or a Zucker Brothers movie. Yeah.
Exactly. It belongs in a different movie. And I think there's a couple of moments that kind of reach that point where I'm just like, that's tonally off. And whereas Beware the Blob is completely tonally all over. There is no tone to that movie. The tone to that movie is fucking stoned people in the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that the first one pulls off its tone so perfectly and so well, while still being charming and funny, and while still being relatably scary for its time period. I think that the Blob remake falls just short of that, whereas I think the Thing remake surpasses its original.
Yeah,
I think the Blob remake falls just a little short, but just a little.
I will say, and it's impossible for me to review things without the context of the time frame.
Yes.
The periods, like
I think you can only truly review a movie 20 years after its release, anyways.
I agree. I literally have said that to people. Like I feel like we've been fantastic reviewers, like intelligent, well-educated people have given really wrong reviews of famous films or records, and I feel like things need time to have a life of its own, to stand the test of time, to be absorbed into the public consciousness and stuff. 2001, The Thing, like so many movies that came out that were panned or hated at the time.
Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane, lots.
Vertigo.
But where, like, with The Thing, like, or another thing, with the Blob 88, like, all of those weird things to me, there's so many other movies at the time who had those weird little tonal shifts for like a sight gag or to really especially films that were aimed at teenagers, films like
Sure. Even this was even post Friday 6.
Yeah.
So even Jason was making jokes by now.
Exactly. So there's a little bit of me that not only understands it, but almost expects that films from that time frame to include those things. I do think you did nail the one where it's like it's because even
it's
the thing
particularly bad.
It's just so again. It's
and the fact that it's attached to that scene and that
exactly,
he does everything but drop a roofie into that
exactly
in the back.
Exactly.
Where he has a whole like key ring of high school class rings each girl. Yeah.
But again, it's
of its time.
But again, I think that's it. So much of it, and I do think that that's why it wasn't as successful and why it wasn't as loved for a long time, because people couldn't couldn't accept that weird, harsh shift of condom joke into one of the most vicious, disgusting on-screen deaths in film history. It's not the fucking Monster Squad. It's not even Night of the Demons, where even the frights are a little silly and like campy and fun. There's nothing. I mean, for horror fanatics, there's nothing but fun in those kills. But
yeah,
separating the art of the practical effects and stuff from the actual story. But to me, like, that's why the film wasn't as beloved for the longest time, is because people sat down, they watched one movie, and then 20 minutes in, all of a sudden, the most horrifying thing happens. But then it jumps back into silliness and sight gags, or like people jumping out of the back of cars and stuff, and then goes into a terrible violent scene. So, which again, I think to your point, you're not wrong. I think those tonal jumps are hard for most people. So, definitely, I definitely respect that number, and I couldn't argue it.
Excellent. Well, it's always fun to talk to you about these things, and I always know that you approach things from the best possible vantage point and perspective. So your opinion is right up there, man. Like I can't even think of anybody right now off the top of my head whose opinion I value more.
Well, that vice versa, Devin. There's a handful of people in my life who the first time I watch any kind of movie, I immediately have to text, and there's basically two of you. So
and our audience knows all of us, because
exactly.
The other one for me is Casey.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because I have a lot of people that if you're a film lover and if you post a lot of stuff on your social media, I mean, I definitely have my wheelhouse. Like I think we all do. We have we love the whole breadth of cinema, but we each have our.
You and me and Casey could not be more different in so many different ways, except for that we are so alike in so many others.
Exactly.
We're like a good 80s remake. We are dissimilar in just the right ways, nice. And exactly right in the rest.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. Exactly. We're like a good 80s remake. Well said. On that note, guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Den of Sin. We will be we are committed to having another episode this month, yes. Right in time for All Hallows Eve, the great Samhain. For Halloween, we will have a brand new episode, which is Hush Hush, right? We're not talking about.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the candy corn for Halloween, and then we haven't gotten to the full Snickers bar presentation of the holiday yet.
I'll have I actually like candy corn more than Snickers, but I totally get your metaphor. This was the little Tootsie Roll, but you will be getting the full size Reese's Pieces or Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, or but
there you go. That works. Whatever's your pleasure.
Although I feel like I don't want to do a disservice calling this episode Reese's or a Tootsie Roll. Who likes Tootsie Rolls? Anyways, you get where I'm going. But yes. Thanks once again, Devin. I will let you.
And thanks for suggesting this, because the Blob was your idea, and I jumped on board right away. This was a really fun one.
Yeah, super fun.
So everybody, make sure to like us and subscribe to us. You can always find this stuff on YouTube. I will make sure that I do my usual bonus list for YouTube that will probably actually have the original Blob and Beware of Blob on the list, so people who are curious can see it. And according to James, the version of Beware Blob on YouTube is better than the version that you'll stream other places.
Yeah, it looks great. It is, I think, straight up the Kino version.
So we're going to keep on putting these out as consistently as we are able to. If you guys want us to do more, like us, subscribe us, let us know that we need to do more. Because right now it's well, I'm not saying that we're living in a desert here, but there's no pay and things have to get kind of shuffled around accordingly. And despite the fact that we would rather do this every week if we could.
Yes, absolutely.
But this is where it comes on you, dear listeners. Like us, subscribe us, recommend us, tell all your movie geek friends and brothers and sisters to check out the Den of Sin, and that will definitely guarantee that we start to come back with more regularity. And outside of that, have a great rest of your October, and we'll see you before the end.
Exactly. Happy hauntings. Thanks, Devin.
Thanks, James. Beware of the blob.
He sleeps, he creeps, he glides around. I don't know the lyrics, actually. They're like stuck in there, but they're not 100%.